Let's open the microphones here. Let me introduce you to Tanya Smith, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor. Mike Brooks worked in law enforcement for years and years, law enforcement analyst for HLN. Let's just break away because for a minute, this is just getting a little wonky, if I may. Looking at all the loci versus the locus versus the numbers versus the assignment from this guy's particular crime lab. Bottom line is for me, we're going through so carefully because DNA matters. And it could prove key here, right?
That's absolutely right. You know, we live in the era of CSI. Jurors expect to hear from the state whether or not there's any DNA evidence, and if there isn't, why there isn't. And in addition to that, they also want to know what efforts were undertaken to get the DNA, if it was done appropriately, and that there was no tampering done in the process.
How thorough the investigation.
Right.
Absolutely.
And one of the main things that he did, he examined the swabbings that were taken for any touch DNA on the gun of George Zimmerman. Was there any DNA there deposited by Trayvon Martin? He also examined the scrapings under the fingernail and the clothing that both men had on that evening. So we'll see what the results are to see if Trayvon Martin was a contributor to anything that maybe George Zimmerman had on and vice versa.
Two great points, things we're watching for, and certainly the jurors are as well. Quick break. We'll take it back to the trial in just a second. All right, let's take you back to this trial here. It looks like these two lawyers are looking over some evidence here before the state that presents this to this crime lab analyst who is still sitting in the hot seat here in this trial, answering some questions about DNA and the science of all of this investigation. Let's go back. Let me go to, while they're sort of mulling over this and looking through some of the papers, Darren Kavanoki, who is in Los Angeles, who is an attorney. You're watching all this with me again today. And just... Are the jurors falling asleep, or are they taking notes? Are they fascinated? Are they sitting on the edge of their seats here on all this science, you think?
Yeah, you know, I think it's like, this is terrible. And here's what's terrible about it. This may be important scientific material, and yes, we're in a CSI era where jurors expect to get some science, but we're reaching the climactic finish of this case. We heard this morning that the prosecution is intending to rest soon. And why it is that they selected this time to bring in this boring stuff to lull these jurors to sleep when you want them at the edge of their seats. If this was a boxing match, I'd begin to suspect that somebody was taking a dive. You know, if I were a conspiracy theorist.
I hear you, and I know you're saying it's terrible, but Tanya Miller, forgive me, you know, making, I think, a really valid point that they have to go through the science, as wonky and as nuanced as it may be, and perhaps a little over the heads of some of the jurors. It's important to establish this is important. This guy knows his stuff, because he may, as we're waiting to see, you know, be able to come out and say yes or no, Trayvon Martin's, you know, DNA was found on the gun, and that could be important.
Absolutely. Look, I think anyone who has had significant experience trying these kinds of cases know that there are parts that are always boring. A trial is not some excitement-filled event that, you know, where they're on the edge of their seats at all times. This is important evidence, and this jury is probably on the edge of their seat wanting to know what the scientific evidence says about this event.
Let's watch.